again, this is with Microsoft, not with our servers, but I'm not sure if, given there was a problem, you saw the notification.
The meeting is now ready to go.
Thank you, Marcy. I'm just going to wait until it is officially 6:30, so we can start. Excuse me, all. Welcome this evening. I'd like to call the September 28th, 2020 regular meeting of council to order at 6:30 p.m. And I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. Members of council, please unmute yourself. I'm going to poll each member and ask that you announce that you are present for us. Councillor Baxter.
Good evening.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
Present.
Councillor Kobayashi.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
I'm here.
Councillor Logan.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Logan has let me know that he is also on call for his other job. And if there's an emergency, he may need to log out at times. So if Councillor Logan, so that council knows that you are not present, will you just turn off your video and we will assume that you are gone if your video is off.
You betcha.
So, great, thank you. I am looking for approval of this evening's agenda, the near-term, long-term, and regular council meeting. However, I'm looking for a recommendation that the near-term and long-term agendas be received, and that the agenda of the regular council meeting of September 28th, 2020, be adopted as amended to remove item 8.3, bylaw number 1807, land use amendment CD 27, Belmont Jerome. So with that change, may I get a motion, please? Moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. No one opposes. Moving on to public participation. There were no written submissions for this evening, and no members of the public have registered to speak. I will confirm one last time with staff that there is nobody for public participation this evening.
That's correct, Mayor.
Thank you. So moving on to Mayor's message. So some great news to talk about, and I know most of council has heard me say this 5, 10, 1,000 times, but I'm going to say it one final time. We had a great week last week. 4 major announcements that I'm very proud about. The first was the C-SPAN coming to the Allendale lands. The C-SPAN project will represent about 90 construction jobs and 44 permanent jobs. The second announcement that we had last week was the announcement of the land purchase for the Royal Bay Elementary School. That will represent a couple hundred construction jobs, and it will represent about 50 permanent jobs that will stay within the community at that school. The huge announcement that we had last week, which if people didn't hear about it, was the announcement that Colwood will be having the Royal BC Museum Archives and Collection Building in the Royal Bay lands, which is a very exciting process and project. It's a $150 million construction project. It represents 650 construction jobs and 300 direct and indirect long-term jobs that will stay in the community. And then finally, the last thing is very proud of the fact that Royal Beach is going to be used for the next 6 months by Netflix and Warner Brothers for a TV series called Made, which is I guess a New York's bestseller. The interesting thing about that I love to talk to people about is that the premise of this TV show is that it is situated in Montana. So the fact that they're using the Royal Beach lands is what they will be doing is actually shooting from the ocean towards the land and making Royal Beach look like Montana. So that's a very interesting thing. So those were our big announcements last week. I really want to say thank you to staff. Staff put in an incredible amount of work and an incredible amount of time and energy to make those wishes a reality. And we very much appreciate that the development community stepped up, provided some great opportunities for our community. And then as well, thank you to staff for making those a reality. Moving on to 5, adoption and receipts of the minutes. 5.1, I am looking for a recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting held September 14th be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any errors, omissions, questions? Seeing none. Oh, no. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I feel it's important to point out that I've made a number of comments that are not captured in the minutes of concerns that I have, especially for the Allendale lands. And I'm just reminding you so that they're not forgotten because of the new way of recording our minutes. My statements aren't recorded, and I'm just trying to make sure that they're not forgotten.
Okay, well, I guess Councillor Day is we sort of have a standard way of taking minutes. I would if you're not happy with the way that is being taken, I mean, we would end up in a situation where I'd have every councillor saying that their comments are not being reflected properly if I was to do this every single time. So I guess, are you looking for us to come back at a future council meeting to discuss a different way of taking minutes?
I would be happy if we would have that discussion. I'm trying to do my due diligence as a member of the council and point out potential future problems as we work, not in a negative way, but just in I'm trying to flag potential issues for the future. And the current methodology for recording the minutes is motions only, for or opposed, so those comments are not being captured.
Correct.
No,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
I'm just not sure how else I can make the public aware that I have raised issues if they're not recorded in the record of the meeting.
Okay. Well, I guess that would be reflected by all of us, though, Councillor Day. I mean, all of us are playing by the same rules. So if I was against something, my comments as well would not be reflected on why I voted in the non-supportive of the motion.
If I can just clarify, it's not about whether or not I support a project that is recorded. What is not recorded is where specific concerns have been raised.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you, Worship. I'm confused because in my mind, the most accurate reflection is the audio recording that lives forever on the webpage and YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Baxter.
No, I was going to make the same point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question on the minutes. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 5.2.
I was opposed,
Oh.
Madam Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Day, correct? Councillor Day opposed the receipt of the minutes. 5.2 regular meeting of council minutes of August 24th. Council, I'm going to read the larger motion. It is recommended that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held August 24th, 2020 be adopted as amended. Regarding, there is a reword for resolution R 2020-315, which is as follows, that the staff report titled Allendale Mixed Use Employment Center rezoning of Lot C be received, and that the appropriate amendments to the land use bylaw be prepared to rezone Lot C, Section 67 and 68, Esquimalt Land Use District, BIP 68962, from the general industrial M2 zone and the residential 1 R1 zone to a mixed use employments 2 MUEC2 zone. And further, that prior to first and second reading of the bylaw, staff provide a report that considers additional regulations between light industrial and residential, parentheses, apartment and attached housing, uses within the mixed use employment center 2 MUEC2 zone, and community amenity contribution and affordable housing policies. May I have that motion, please? That's moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Jansen. Excuse me. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 6, correspondence requiring council direction. This is in regards to the letter of support for a proposed daycare business at Colwood Corners. The letter writer is available should council have any questions. Do I have a recommendation? Councillor Day, do you have a recommendation?
Thank you. I'm happy to move that we send a letter of support. Daycares are definitely something that our residents need. But I would also note that I did not receive, it may be the problems, we had some technical issues with Outlook, but I did not receive the letter. But
Okay.
I'm happy to move it.
Or the package.
So we do have a motion to receive it and to provide a letter of support, I'm assuming for myself. Do I have a seconder to that? That is seconded by Councillor Jansen. Any discussion? There are 2 people, Councillor Jansen and then Parkinson.
Sorry, I was lowering my hand. You must have
Okay.
waited it.
All right, thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, great idea for a daycare. I can support that. I just think it's appropriate that perhaps as you sign the letter and deliver it, you should flag to the applicant that there is, of course, a daycare getting built at the Juanita Rec Center at present, which will be a fairly major daycare. And obviously they should be aware of that significant, I guess, competition if they're going to go in business with this opportunity. So that's my only comment.
Thank you. And I think you just told them that I think they now on notice. Councillor Kobayashi. Oh,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question though. Why is this required? Like if it's zoned, like that's part of the zoning, is it not on Colwood Corners? So why do we have to do a letter of support? I'm just curious.
I will look to staff.
Thank you, Mayor Martin. It's Selena here. The particular applicant in this case is applying for grant funding, and one of the ways to support your application is to provide a letter of support from local elected officials. And so that's why it's here before you tonight.
Excellent. Thank you. I don't see anybody else's hand up, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hand. Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7, new business. This is a notice of motion from Councillor Doug Kobayashi in regards to the disposal of municipal lands. I will hand it off to Councillor Kobayashi.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Martin. I'll just read what my my motion is, that staff request expressions of interest from the public for the purchase of the gravel and or land for the city-owned lands located at 3698 Machosen Road, and legally described as Lot A, Section 51, 52, and 53, VIP 58414 in the area known as the Royal Bay Gravel Pit. And if I could take this moment to motivate this.
Oh, just, sorry, Councillor Kobayashi, just before you do, I will let you motivate.
Okay.
I just gotta get a seconder, and that is Councillor Jansen. So sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor. Sorry about that. I knew better than that. So I guess these are my reasons for this. Right now, with the recent announcement of the Royal BC Museum in the building in the lot right next to our lot, what you have is you're going to just have mounds of gravel, not very particularly aesthetically nice scenery for when they do build the RBCM museum archive building. I just think that it would be an eyesore, and I don't know, since the beginning of time here, since we've taken over as council, that was one of the issues that I think it was Councillor Parkinson has been hot under the collar about is at least removing that gravel, selling that gravel, because they are assets, and the sales of those assets should go to the benefit of the taxpayers of the city of Colwood. The second reason why I think that this is required, because as you know, last year we had a proposal. It wasn't a formal proposal at the time, where a company had come in, had shown interest on those lands, and we never responded. In fact, we did nothing. And to me, it's either make a decision. If we don't want to sell it, if that is the will of council, then fine. Then we say it's not the will of council and go away. But don't just leave people hanging in abeyance. The third reason, and the most compelling one to me, is I look at, yes, we've had a lot of great news announcements over the last week, but it's predicated on one major assumption, and that major assumption is the economy doesn't change, where we just go along our merry way. And right now, I'm concerned, and I'll go on record as saying this right now, that COVID-19 isn't going away. In fact, from what I see in the numbers right now, it's getting worse. And I don't realize, I don't think we all understand what the actual economic impact of COVID-19 is. There's always a delay, and when we stop getting CERB for those people that are receiving it, it's going to have a major effect. And the whole economy itself could go into a recession or whatever. I'm not an economist, but everything I read right now, it certainly points that way. So at any one time, these projects could be halted. Every one of them that we've announced right now, every single one of them. So there's a risk, and it's a risk tolerance. I don't know what's acceptable to people, but we should be doing something proactively, in my mind, right now, to mitigate risk. And right now, we do have a valuable asset. I'm not going to disagree, but as I said before, we're not collecting anything from it right now. It is giving us zero revenue dollars to our city. And if someone wants to come along there and it fits, it has to go through a process, of course. But if it fits, our needs, it brings jobs, and it brings, potentially you have enough land there to produce over $1 million worth of tax revenue a year. That's what we're losing out on right now. So that is the major thing that I think, the major reason that I'm trying to motivate this particular motion, because let's see what people want to do. I mean, there are, I know, I believe that there's talk in the town right now where people want to have made inklings or impressions that they want to acquire this land to create jobs, to create revenue generation for the city. Anyways, I know that it's one way or the other. I don't have any my dithers aren't one way or the other, but I still think we have to make a decision on whether we sell this land or we don't sell this land. Well, at least as a minimum, we should be disposing of that, of the gravel. Anyways, that's my motivation.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. Councillor Jansen?
Thank you, Worship. I find this intriguing, and I'd love to hear what the result is from my peers. But a couple of questions to start with. What is the current zoning on that? Can perhaps Brent help us with that?
And no problem. Through your worship, the current zoning of the lands is AR1, which is a rural residential one. It basically speaks to estate lots with rental carriage homes. Would also be suitable for public park and playgrounds with public art. That is the current zoning.
So is there a net benefit for us to consider altering that zoning to something that might include light industrial or beyond?
Through the chair, the official community plan designation for the area is considered neighborhood and hazardous area, which means that portions of it, especially the east side of Metchosin Road, are steeply sloped. That would be one of the questions to council is attributing the OCP designation and rezoning the land with council through the public process prior to any further consideration, and staff would be more than willing to bring a report back to speak to the various options available for council.
In my well, as a layperson, I take it this property becomes increased in value if we look to upzone it.
One of the positives of pre-zoning land or upzoning land is the fact that council can state their vision for the land, and then the successful proponent, if it goes out to market tender, has then the very clear awareness of what council is expecting to see. However, sometimes pre-zoning the land doesn't allow the purchaser to realize their full vision, in which case they might wish to come back to council and rezone or consider it anyway. Typically, during the disposition of land, the highest and best land use has the highest valuation applied.
So again, a simple answer is all I need. Is there a point to for us to get involved as far as the zoning, or is it better to, if we decide to put it out to RFP or expressions of interest?
Before I let staff answer that, Councillor Jansen, one of my comments was going to be that this motion, I do appreciate the motion, and I appreciate where the motion's coming from. I won't be supporting it in that, just from a standpoint of, I think it's early, and I think the motion that I will be asking for later, after we discuss this one, will be to direct staff to bring back land use zoning options to this committee for discussion prior to us looking at going out to tender or to having any sort of discussions. I'm passionate that I think we need to look at rezoning this land before we begin looking at options of selling it or doing anything else with it. So I don't think it presently fits. So I will be putting that motion after we discuss this motion, Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. And that's about it. But I also see there's two aspects to this. I personally would like to hear more and have some more input on the disposal of the lands itself, which I believe should probably move to an in-camera forum. But as far as the material that's residing on the property, let's have at her, put that out on the open gravel market, if there is one, or sell it as gravel futures or something.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting this motion for a number of reasons. Firstly, I like the concept of going for expressions of interest. We're not asking anybody for a final decision or a fixed price or anything like that. We're just trying to determine what the interest is in the real world, so to speak. As you know, I've talked about this before. I think that the gravel supplies on that lot are well and away in excess of what the city is going to need in the very, very long-term future. I think that they're an incredible asset that a number of the major civil contractors in the region should probably want to get their hands on to help them be more competitive in their bids for the upcoming works in South Colwood and South Langford and the like while we're in a busy thing. I mean, as you can imagine, the competition for gravel is put it in a truck in Shawnigan Lake and drive it over the Malahat and get it to your job site, or perhaps put it on a barge, take it to downtown Victoria and drive it to your job site. If you have the opportunity to pick it up on Machosen Road, drive it to your job site, I think that is worth a lot of money. Again, and this is just my expectation. That's why I think the expression of interest is the appropriate mechanism, not to demand hard and fast numbers or anything. Let's see what it says. As far as the land sales, I think I agree with some of the comments I'm hearing. You know, I think for lack of a better term, we're holding the feet to the fire of the Royal Bay and Royal Beach developers to make sure they do something really special in that area. And I don't think we can then shrug our shoulders and do something of a lower quality. So let's see, there may be some people who go, I'd like to do something really special there. And there may be a number of people that go, well, if I could buy it for, you know, what was it, Brent, state residential lots with a carriage home, you know, I'll do that. To me, that wouldn't interest me. But let's see what the market has to say. And if we do get interest in purchasing the property, then we can sit down and decide what we do in the way of zoning or not zoning and making a formal offer to sell the property. Right now, in my opinion, we're just asking the marketplace what their level of interest is. And I think that's going to be incredibly valuable information for this council. So as I said, I'll certainly support this motion.
Okay, I'm going to be asking Mr. Earl, I'm going to look for a comment from you. One of my concerns about the comments of Councillor Parkinson just made was if we are looking at expressions of interest on a piece of land that is presently zoned as agricultural residential, and then we receive expressions of interest that do not fit that zoning, and then this council goes out and changes the zoning, have we put ourselves at a financial, or excuse me, a legal issue in regards versus rezoning the land first before we begin to look for expressions of interest? Can you please comment on that?
Thank you, Your Worship. From my perspective, the OCP vision for the site should be taken into consideration if council were to seek expressions of interest. And so if an expression were to be received that was in line with the vision articulated in the OCP, then I think council would be on firm ground in moving the zoning in that direction.
And if it isn't?
If council was desirous to make a shift in the use away from the current OCP designation, there may be a more transparent opportunity to have that discussion in advance of seeking either expressions of interest and or specific offers to purchase.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. Question to staff. Do we have a grip on how much gravel we need for our municipal infrastructure and uses on an annual basis?
Through the chair, this year we went out and surveyed all the different stockpiles there. So I'm going to take your question in twofold. We know exactly the material that's there, and we know exactly the practicality and usage of it. Staff are accessing about 2.5 truckloads of material a year. It's very, very slow, and that's why the piles are still sitting there. And there's a couple of piles of mixed material that would need to be screened and sorted. So we know exactly the materials that's there. We know on what composition that's there. We haven't done what will be called sieve analysis or gradation analysis to know exactly the makeup, but we use about 2.5 truckloads. This year, we actually accessed quite a bit of it for the shouldering work that was done on Ocean Boulevard.
Great, thank you. And also on our agenda tonight is the beginning or the next report in our parks master planning process. And one of the things that's identified in it is that as we grow, we are going to need to increase the amount of parks that we have. So I just draw your attention to both of those things in terms of whatever we decide. We don't want to have left ourselves, you know, spending more on something else and then not getting quite as much return as we maybe had hoped for it. So I continue to be of the opinion that the lands should be saved for future uses, because I've just seen many, many times over the years how we are always looking for land and how the price is always going up. And that we do have a lot of municipal infrastructure that this could very much help with. Whether we're talking about improving a road or building an overpass, all of those things generally take a great deal of gravel to lay the foundation. So if we are going to pursue something that changes the designation in the OCP, I really think that the residents of Colwood should be fully consulted in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter?
I think we discussed at the last meeting how we were going to need extra staff to take on all of the current rezonings, development permits, etc., that are going on in the city. The city's probably busier than it's ever been in that respect. And if we're discussing adding additional staff to be able to deal with the current workload, then I'm not sure why we're thinking up extra things for staff to do. And I think it might be better to delay any work on this property until we have the staff that we need and a little bit extra to deal with the current workload, rather than interrupt what's going on right now. And when we do come to consider whether we rezone it or sell it, I don't think there's any loss in rezoning it. I don't think you can go wrong rezoning it. But if we come to think about putting it on the market, I think we're going to need information from staff along the lines of how does the loss of tax revenue that we could get from it if it was developed in line with the OCP compare with the gain in value by continuing to own it, because land in this area increases in value fairly rapidly. And will the sale of the property simply take a development that would have gone elsewhere in Royal Bay and put it on our lands, so no gain in tax revenue that way? Would rezoning before offering it for sale actually increase the value of it? I think is a good question for staff to answer in a future report. But in the meantime, I think we should leave staff to get on with the important work involved in all of the things we've announced recently and the things that were already going on. We should not consider this further at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. When I look at this, I realize that we've got little to no return coming back to the taxpayer at the moment. And if we have a duty, in my humble opinion, to extract as much revenue on behalf of the taxpayer from any land or assets that we can. And I think exploring what Councillor Kobayashi has suggested, the option to sell or value, can run parallel with looking at various zoning options, so we can maximize the highest and best use of that property. Fact is, it may be worth more in 10 years, but the fact is, if we sold it now, extracted revenue from the gravel and had a sustained source of revenue, tax revenue over the course of the years, I think we get better value, frankly. And if we're worried about the future, council has the option to create a rainy day fund, target the revenue from that property into an infrastructure fund to do everything that we've all said we wanted to do. So I think we owe it to the taxpayer to at least explore it. So I will be supporting the recommendation.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Logan. Sorry, my phone's just beeping. We'll turn that off. I will make my comments one final time and then I'll call the question because we've all had an opportunity to speak once. I know Councillor Jensen would like to look at severing it, and I will sever, or I'll look for permission to sever the motion in a moment. I'm not against the motion, and I want to be clear about that. That this isn't that I'm against the motion, but I am going to be voting against it because I believe it is sincerely premature. I think it is the responsibility of this council to be very clear by rezoning the land. If we rezone the land to what we have a desire for it to be, then it becomes very clear to the outside development community what we as a council believe the community wishes for that land to be. To be looking at expressions of interest when the land is presently zoned for agricultural 1, which basically means on 10 acres, you get 10 houses with 1 acre lots. And to be looking at selling that land like that, I think is irresponsible to the taxpayers. And I believe by looking at expressions of interest before we rezone the land, we create a liability for the city that a developer can come back and say that he was hurt financially by our actions. I think it's cleaner. I think it's healthier. I think it's much better to direct this back to staff to get suggestions on what the rezoning of this land should be, rezone the land with what Councillor Day said, consultations with the public, and then that gives us that ability to move forward. Saying that, that's why I will not be supporting the motion, but I also did say that I will be offering a different motion after this one is voted on. In regards to the motion, Councillor Kobayashi, would you feel comfortable with severing the motion so that it reads, so that staff requests expressions of interest from the public for the purchase of gravel, and then a second motion for the lands? Or do you want them tied together?
I'm okay with that, Mayor Martin.
Okay, so what we will do is we will sever it. And so the first motion that we will vote on is that staff requests expressions of interest from the public for the purchase of the gravel and so on, located at the address. So I will clear everybody's hands. On the first motion, those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Sorry, Councillor Baxter opposes.
Yes.
No, sorry, I'm being too fast. Councillor Baxter and Day oppose. So I'll clear that. I'm just waiting to make sure. Okay, and then the second motion is that staff requests expressions of interest from the public for the purchase of the lands for the city-owned lands located at 3698 Metchosin Road. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Councillor Baxter, Councillor Day, Councillor Jansen, Mayor Martin opposed. That motion fails. Motion arising. I would propose an additional motion that we should, council should direct staff to bring back land use zoning options in regards to 3698 Metchosin Road and report that back to council. I've got Councillor Jansen has seconded that motion. Discussion on that motion. Excuse me. So Councillor Baxter, then Parkinson.
I'd just like to really reiterate that I think we shouldn't be doing this at this time. I think staff are quite busy with equally lucrative development that is going on. And I would intend to offer an amendment to this. Well, I guess I should do that now. I'd like to amend the proposed motion with the addition that this should be postponed until staff have sufficient spare staff time to do it.
How would you, I don't, so Councillor Baxter, I'm just trying to clean this up for you. I don't like vague motions because they might never in the next 20 years have time to do this. So would you like to put a timeline on it?
6 months.
6 months?
6 months.
Do I have a seconder to that amendment? Sorry, excuse me, I got to clear everybody's hands. And I see Mr. Molnar. I will let you speak to that after I have a seconder. Do I have a seconder to that motion? Councillor Day has seconded it. And before I go to discussion, Mr. Molnar.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. If we were going to bring back motions just to address Councillor Baxter's concern, it would be after the projects that we've currently underway, because this would be received as a new application and be put in line. So council would need to direct us staff to bring it forward in advance of the other projects that are currently underway.
Well, presently the motion says that you would bring it back within 6 months.
Sorry, I'm working with the mute button. Within 6 months, that takes us to around March. We'll still be in budget time. If it could be just as applicable, that would be fantastic. It should probably be before 6 months, but we've got a very busy 3 ahead of us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. If council was desirous to move this forward in a manner that was faster than staff could currently provide for, we could, this is the type of project that we could contract out. And so staff could bring back a price to council to move this forward in a faster manner.
Okay. Is there any more discussion in regards to the amendment to this motion, which was, Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just want to focus us on the concern that Councillor Baxter has raised, which is that we don't want to compete with the developments that have just started to get going. So I do think that a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, but not if everyone's scaring them all up. So I just think that if we could just be patient with ourselves because we are going pretty quick.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else's hands. So I'm going to call the question. And this is just in regards to the amendment to the motion, not the main motion. Yeah, so Councillor Baxter's amendment.
Mr. Mayor, can we please reread that or review it for us?
Certainly. So so the motion, the main motion is to direct staff to bring back land use zoning options. And Councillor Baxter's was within a 6 month time period. So basically not prioritizing it. Clear, Councillor Jansen? Okay. So I will call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. I'm just giving people time. Councillor Parkinson, Kobayashi, Logan, and Jansen oppose, so that motion fails. So that brings us back to my main motion, which was to direct staff to bring back land use zoning options to this council. Discussion, Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Your Worship. I know I supported the initial motion and I don't want this to sound like sour grapes, but if we're going down the road of seeing what the interest is in gravel purchase and sales, I think to come back with a proposal for look at the land before we know what we're doing with the gravel is just really a waste of time. I mean, the proposals on the gravel are likely to be, I'm going to pick it up and move it and you can have the site clean ready to go in a week. To if I can dribble it out of there as I need it over the next 5 years. It could be something like that. So if the intent of this council is to go out and see what the market is for the gravel, let's solve that problem first and then see if and when we have a site that we may wish to dispose of. So I hope that doesn't sound like sour grapes because I was on the other side of the main motion, but to me, it looks like there's no point spending time and energy on perhaps selling a piece of land if we end up the next week deciding to lease it to 5 years so somebody can move gravel. So I'll be opposing this motion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jansen.
Sorry, Your Worship. I am somewhat persuaded by Councillor Parkinson's oratory, but I was going to suggest a possible amendment if we do want to push this forward, as the CAO suggested, in a timely manner. Maybe this is something that we should assess for contracting out, and that way it resolves the burden on our staff, and we get some timely feedback, and we can decide whether we want to go down that road further for the expense or not.
Okay, so sorry, Councillor Jansen, were you looking to do an amendment to that, or did you want to do a motion after that? This motion in regards to that? Like, so for example, I'll just give an example. So if the example, hypothetically, if this motion passed to direct staff to bring back land use zoning options, you could put a motion asking that before staff do that, that they look to bring back a budgetary decision by council if they could contract that out versus doing it in-house. So that is an option.
So I'm prepared to make an amendment if necessary. Maybe we can hear from the CAO what the cleanest way to go about this is. I don't want to make mischief where we ought not to.
Okay, Mr. Earl.
Thank you, Your Worship. Should this motion pass, staff will return to council with an estimation of when this work might occur. The current internal team, as council is well aware, is actively involved in a number of files, and we would place this item kind of next in line after those files. That said, not knowing what might come into the door next week or the week after. So we would give you an estimation of when we would when this work might occur. We could also bring to council options for increasing our internal staff temporarily to accelerate that process, and a cost for that.
So I'm fine with that as the way it's laid out, that we hear back on a timeline with an option or two. I don't think this necessitates an amendment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Baxter.
We have an amendment under discussion, and not only are most of the speakers actually speaking to the main motion rather than the amendment, but we're then discussing an amendment alongside the other amendment at the same time as?
No, we're not actually on an amendment, Councillor Baxter. Your amendment failed. So what happened was we had.
I didn't realize we'd had a vote. Sorry.
So that's all right. So where we're at is we had the first motion was for expression of interest for the gravel, which passed. The expression for the land failed. I then brought forward a motion to direct staff to bring back the land use zoning. You made an amendment. We voted on the amendment. The amendment failed, and I came back to the main motion.
Okay, I totally missed the vote.
That's okay. So I'm going to clear everybody, but I am going to give everybody one more opportunity to discuss the motion. Anyone else? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. And I'm just giving people a moment. Councillor Day, Parkinson, and Baxter oppose. The motion carries. Moving on to 7.2. This is a bylaw notice enforcement regulation. This is a recommendation from the September 8th Committee of the Whole. May I have a mover and seconder for the recommendation, please? Moved by Councillor Logan. Seconded by Councillor Parkinson. And just so that for people listening in at home, the recommendation was that staff continue to work with neighboring jurisdiction to explore costs and services sharing and bring implementation options back to council on the next budget process. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 7.3. This is the 2021 to 2025 financial plan process. This is again a recommendation from the September 8th Committee of the Whole meeting. The recommendation is that the 2021 to 2025 financial plan process be endorsed as follows. And then there are just basically dates from September of 2020 until April 2021 of the budgetary cycle. Moved by Councillor Baxter, second by Councillor Kobayashi. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.4. This is the annual report. This is a recommendation from the September 8th Committee of the Whole meeting that the 2019 annual report be received. Moved by Councillor Jansen. Just looking for a seconder. Second by Councillor Logan. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. No one opposes. Moving on to 7.5. This is from our corporate officer in regards to an appointment for the Capital Regional Emergency Service is telecommunications or CREST. Councillor Logan has done a fantastic job sitting as our representative for a very long time. Thank you so much, Councillor Logan, for all the work you've done with CREST. We do need to have a new an appointee. So I am open to council for nominations, please. I will, I'm happy to, first of all, nominate, oh, I see somebody's hand. Councillor Parkinson.
I think we should twist Councillor Jansen's arm into taking this one.
All right, Councillor Jansen, are you comfortable with that? I'm assuming he is. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Excellent. Is there anyone
Big
else?
shoes to fill.
Is there anyone else who would like to nominate anyone? Seeing none, then what the recommendation that I need will be that effective November 18th, Councillor Dean Jansen be appointed to serve as the city's representative on this Capital Regional Emergency Services Telecommunications CREST to December 31st, 2021, including acting as the city shareholder representative for the 2021 annual general meeting. That is moved by Councillor Parkinson, seconded by Councillor Logan. Clear hands. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. No one opposes. Moving on to 7.6, Prosperity Roundtable Meeting Themes. This is a recommendation from the September 14th Economic Prosperity Committee. Mr. Borhill, did you want to discuss?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Economic Prosperity Committee endorsed staff's recommendation, and the recommendation that was put forward in the report that was rather lengthy in terms of outlining potential themes was put forward to council. I'm here to answer any questions if there are any. Thanks.
Great. I'm looking for a mover and seconder to the staff from the committee recommendation from the September 14th. That has been made by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Is there any discussion in regards to the recommendation? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Seeing none, that motion passes. Moving on to 7.7, this is our senior planner for Parks and Recs master plan update. I will invite Mrs. Collingson to do what she does.
Thank you, Your Worship.
There she is.
So as you all know, earlier this year, the city began to take on the task of working towards creating Colwood's first ever Parks and Recreation Master Plan. In the last few months, you may recall walking by posters up in parks, completing the survey, and or seeing various tidbits of information showcasing our parks across social media platforms. We are here tonight to offer a progress report and a check-in on how this Parks and Recreation Master Plan is going. So without further ado, I will introduce you again to the lead consultant from Lanark Consulting, Kate Evans, who will offer the overview. Note a copy of the presentation she's about to give you is included within your agenda package. Kate? Kate, you're up.
Sorry about that, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me fine now.
Sorry, yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Thanks for that confirmation. I'll just begin sharing the slideshow again here now. And if everything is visible from your end, then I'll begin.
Yeah, we can see your PowerPoint. We're looking at our Parks Colwood September 28, 2020 presentation.
Wonderful. Okay, back on track. Thank you, Jill, and good evening, Mayor and Council. So I'm delighted to share an update this evening for our Parks Colwood, which is the Parks and Recreation Master Plan process, and specifically to kind of update on what's been happening over the last couple of months and to prepare for the upcoming community engagement for phase 2. So just in terms of a general outline, so you know where I'm going, I'll begin with a brief check-in just on the overall process. I'll spend most of the time going into a couple of the key details in terms of progress and foundation, focusing on phase 1 summary highlights from what we heard from community feedback, as well as our other investigations, and then some of the analysis highlights as well that kind of coupled together with the engagement pieces in order to steer us to where we're moving in phase 2. And then moving forward, I'll share a brief update just on the draft vision and goals, which are the kind of key foundation and check-in piece that'll guide not only the kind of engagement process, but the overall document carrying forward. And then I'll touch on phase 2 engagement plans to share an overview of what's planned for that through October, and then next steps in terms of what the schedule we anticipate for the project is moving forward from there. So just briefly as a refresher for where we're at in the overall process, we're in phase 2, which is kind of right midway through the process. We just finished our kind of background internal version of this phase and are about to launch into the community engagement portion of things to invite feedback from the broader community in order to gauge if we've heard it right and how we're going forward from there. So phase 2 is really focused on the exploration of options and draft directions. And then phase 3 is kind of furthering the plan development details and coming back to both public and council for a final review. So phase 2 is quite key in terms of we're moving from the gathering ideas and initial work that we'd done in phase 1 and input that we have received, and responding to that, we've started to shape it, but it's still very much able to be refined. And so it's an important midway point for us, both internally as well as engaging the broader community in order to draw towards a process and plan conclusion that's well supported. So I'm going to touch on just a few of the key components from what we heard, and to start off just in the big level of things, we got about 165 survey participants, which is about half the overall people who engaged with the project website and kind of were checking what was going on. And then there was also a series of about 30 postings in the community to help raise awareness and outreach and interest beyond the digital platform. With the shift in the engagement strategy that was outlined, we wanted to be sure to still achieve the key aims in not only being digital, but to try and spread our wings and resources in order to capture those that are not either have barriers or otherwise not interested in participating digitally. And then at the bottom there, that little thumbs up, there was strong satisfaction feedback received from a range of different items. mostly focused around parks and trails, but also we asked details about maintenance levels, you know, things like mowing and vegetation and et cetera. And across the board, most of the response for those components was satisfied or very satisfied from the community members that we heard from. And as well as details asking about the number of parks and trails, quality, distribution, variety, etc. So in a one slide summary, the satisfaction at those levels was quite good. In terms of who we heard from in the survey component, we always like to look at it to help understand and consider how we use and consider that feedback data. So we reviewed the demographics of the respondents in comparison to the general demographics for the city. And the key kind of notes or takeaways that we had from that and the lens that we looked at the data under was that we didn't hear from youth directly. There was a very small percentage. It's not uncommon for a process like this, but it is an important one to note because as you can see, about 17% or so of the population is in that category, but we didn't hear from those folks directly. But related to that, more than 50% of the respondents we did hear from, so the larger group then is represented by the demographics, is that 30 to 49 category. So technically that overrepresents them in the survey data that we received, but there is a relationship of that age category in helping to represent input from a portion of families or kind of representing children or youth under the age of 18 indirectly. So it's not a replacement, but it is a consideration. And then we did have further questions to understand the representation of families amongst who was responding, because there were questions about not just your individual response, but about household. And then the representation of those over the age of 45 was pretty much almost exactly on mark with the demographics for the city. So big picture is that the input that we received was reasonably representative for the city, which gives us some good, just I guess, lens or considerations for us to understand how to use the data that we got out of it. So a couple of the key highlights and summaries from what we heard overall via the survey and stakeholder engagement that was completed. We heard most of the details specific to parks and trails and about informal uses. So things like walking, for exercise, hiking, picnicking, relaxing, etc. And so we have some very good and detailed information across the boards on parks and trails, but in phase 2, we're pursuing asking some additional questions about existing indoor and outdoor recreation facilities and programs to better understand some more details in that regard. There were some questions that included those as options, but they didn't come through with a lot of response. And so we're just wanting to be sure in coming back that we're asking some additional details that's specific just to those items to understand if they are in fact lower priority or if there are other gaps or things that we need to consider from a community standpoint in addition to the technical analysis. So the same park areas did come up repeatedly and it's probably not a surprise. So we received feedback for almost all parks and neighborhood areas. So what you see here is just a short list of what were the most frequent or the strongest amongst what we heard. So community waterfront being pretty much at the top there, Colwood Creek Park, Ocean View Park, Lookout Lake Park, Royal Beach and Royal Bay neighborhoods, as well as Triangle Mountain and Latoria neighborhoods. And in addition to location-specific comments, the other key theme that was clear was just hearing about different amenities, and sometimes there was a suggestion of where these amenities were to go, and other times it was just noting a need or a lack thereof in what people experience currently within the system. And so the top kind of 10 or so items that were at the top of that list, similar to the last one, there were many other things, but these are the kind of top list items. Connector trails, that one was very much at the top, and it relates both directly to trails within parks, but actually more specifically, trails and connections for getting people from different areas in the community to parks, as well as neighborhood playgrounds, off-leash dog park area, washrooms, something we heard very broadly across the board, and then some more specific items that were of interest to specific groups. So skate park, bike pump track, splash park, paddling boat launch. And so that's not exclusive to paddle boards, but all kind of vessels that are non-motorized. And pickleball and tennis courts, as well as a couple of additional items, including a disc golf course or mountain biking trails. And so closely related to key themes were priorities from the feedback as far as key concerns or the areas that seem to be most in conflict or with the most limitations for people and how they experience parks and trails and recreation in Colwood currently. And so from the feedback that we received, the top 3 items of note there. First one being connectivity, and similar to the first item on that previous list, it was mostly about how people get to parks, so and how they get there safely. So for example, transportation infrastructure to support walking or cycling within a neighborhood to a park or within a neighborhood to a park that's adjacent or something to that respect. The second item is dogs in parks, and that pendulum swings both ways. So both park users with and without dogs and the limitations of on leash as well as off leash. So very much representation on both sides of that, but a very key theme in terms of what we heard. And then the last one, environmental protection. This is a key priority that many raised, and it wasn't so much that it was an issue with how Colwood acts currently, but it was highlighting that for something that is of key importance to them moving forward. So to protect and preserve natural assets, and concerns about development impacts or loss of trees or things like that, and the role that this plan and parks plays in, and people's current understanding of the community and their desire for that to really move forward. So in terms, the key takeaway, I guess, from those key highlights is that the community feedback we received, and one of our key goals in phase 2 engagement with the community is to show them how that feedback that they provided is really of direct influence to phase 2 and the draft directions that we're exploring as we move forward. And so the second and related piece is that feedback has been combined and considered along with the technical inventory and analysis that we've completed. And so I'll just go through a couple of the key items there. And the first one that I'll get to before the highlights is actually just framing a little bit the limitations actually of quantitative analyses in the context of parks and recreation planning. And really the couple key points here are just to share that, you know, each metric that is explored in this realm, it focuses on one and only one area. And so it includes a range of assumptions. And in essence, the standard metrics and targets for parks and rec planning present information in a seemingly black and white way when there's actually a lot of kind of gray considerations that are important. Things like that, a highly localized context or the quality of the resources being quantified, that kind of thing. And so for these reasons, in parks and recreation planning in the province and for much of Canada, it's evolved to still incorporate this practice, but on with a much reduced reliance on this as the only thing or as a primary means of directing what happens carrying forward. On the flip side, of course, there certainly are advantages to having this lens on things. And really it's that it provides pieces that when combined all together and looked at in concert, it helps to identify gaps in strategic actions. And the second one is perhaps the most important, which is that as long as we use targets using forward that are specific to the context of Colwood, so there isn't a magic benchmark metric for many of these things that are relevant to all communities. That's been the trend to move away from, because having it standardized is somewhat limiting. But if we do establish things that are appropriate for this city and community, then it is useful for the city in tracking as you move forward and check in on a 5-10 year basis, et cetera, to understand how you are doing, not necessarily in direct reference to metrics that others are using, but to have that as a report card kind of tool for staff and for council to use. So now that I've kind of said my piece on the pieces, it's fair that I actually tell you what was done as part of that more quantitative approach. And so really just to share the methodology, it's that it's a combination of, so not only the comparison metrics and targets, but also the community specific inventory, the local trends research, and the community feedback all together those are what kind of work together in concert for our methodology in terms of charting the strategic actions and recommendations that are being drafted and presented for feedback in phase 2, and ultimately will form the plan. So the 3 key components that were undertaken from a metrics and kind of quantitative analysis standpoint are related to parkland supply. So that's both looking at population-based supply of overall parklands in the city, as well as area-based supply of it, parkland distribution. So that's overall where are parks situated in the city? Are they distributed evenly? Are there areas that are maybe even over serviced, but at the lack of servicing or access in some other areas? So we look at that for overall parklands as well as for playgrounds specifically as something that is particularly important from a distribution standpoint. And then the last piece is more specific to the recreation facilities side of things. And so we've both looked into the details of what Colwood has currently, and also kind of comparing or checking in with other communities of similar size or with a similar point of reference to understand that. So I'll go through a couple of the key highlights and findings. There's a lot of kind of details or numbers here, and so I won't focus on going through all of those. Sorry, Mayor, do you have a question?
Yeah, so sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm getting just for a moment. Councillor Day has a question. Councillor Day?
Okay, sure.
Thank you. I'm just curious, in reading the report, I didn't see any metrics or quantitative targets related to accessibility. And that is something that we've been working on for, well, more than 10 years to try to increase that. So are you benchmarking the accessibility or the amount of accessibility trails? Do you have a target?
No, that's a very good question, Councillor Day. And so accessibility is a key consideration for this plan and for many plans related to Parks and Recreation, and really pretty much all other disciplines at the moment. As far as benchmarking metrics, there are recommendations and items that I'll get to later in the presentation that deal with how the plan will inform considerations for how accessibility is considered moving forward, but there was not the ability to pursue data in order to establish what the current accessibility ranking of resources within the city of Colwood are today. And really for a lot of the comparative communities that we have, although they have principles and strategic actions related to increasing accessibility, they likewise do not have that data currently. It's something that I think we'll see more of, but there isn't a commonly available benchmark for what should be achieved. And we also don't have the information, the detailed kind of system level review. Those sorts of things are very much starting to happen more, but we do not have that available at present for Colwood. So that the accessibility points will be brought forward in other ways. When I had the slide about the kind of combination of 5 elements that go into forming the balanced strategic actions, the metrics piece is one of those, but it's only one of them. So what I'm going through here is kind of a 5th, I guess you could look at it in that way, of the considerations. And I don't have anything specific to accessibility in terms of numbers or quantitative information.
So we did create the user-friendly trail guide. Did you access that?
Yes, certainly. Yep.
So I guess it's a little bit different way of looking at the accessibility, because we're not prescribing or labeling it as accessible, where we were aiming to identify what you would find there so that people make their own decisions.
No, and that document is actually, when we look at communities across the board, having that, and especially trails as being an increasingly important part of the Parks and Recreation picture for communities, having that detail already in place is a step up compared to what a lot of communities are trying to go for in order to advance the kind of normalizing of universal access and the resources related to that in their Parks and Recreation system. So it's a really great tool to have, and something that we've been considering. It doesn't, there isn't a common place for where that comes through in a number to say this means that Colwood has a value of X and is compared to a benchmark of Y, but having that resource is valuable nonetheless. I don't know. So do you have any other questions that I can offer clarification on at this point?
Well, just I'm hoping that when you're finished, because this is a master plan, that we would have some targets so that we could measure. Obviously, your report concludes that we're going to need more parkland. So I'm hoping that we will get some direction from your report on, where that would be recommended.
Yes, yeah, so very much there's a variety of components, of which the target side of things is actually a relatively smaller piece compared to the other strategic actions that will come forward. And accessibility very much relates to a series of those other strategic actions that are, I guess, they're not a number, but they are nonetheless meaningful and formerly the key content, I guess you could say, of where the direction of the plan seems to be going. So it's certainly something that we are considering, but not something that was able to be explored by this process or by many others in terms of just the numbers component. So that one piece of the pie on the investigation side of things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So people may have had a moment to look at the further details on this slide than I was going to have time to dwell on. So this is just an overview of that first piece, which is the population-based analysis, which looks at what's the existing supply of parkland that Colwood has in relation to its population. And so that's looked at in hectares per 1,000 people is the benchmark and structure for that. And so especially since this is the first Parks and Recreation Master Plan for Colwood as a city, we've conducted reviews with 6 other communities just to give you a sense of not only saying Colwood has 5.32 hectares per 1,000 population. Out of context, what does that mean? And so we've selected the 6 communities that you see there just as a means of showing a little bit how Colwood relates to other communities that are either neighboring or have some other similarities in terms of their regional roles or their population densities and that sort of thing. And so the green item there is that, the key finding is currently the city's overall municipal parkland to population ratio is good at 5.32 hectares. It's a little bit above average for the communities that we looked at. There is no longer kind of provincial or Canadian target averages for that. So a lot of times we do just look at the best comparative communities that we have good data on in order to just have a reference point. One of the challenges that we look at sometimes is that it really depends on what you consider in that category of municipal parkland. And so we chose places that had the relevant level of detail to know that we were comparing apples to apples in terms of what overall numbers were being pulled in there. And so the other key finding, besides the fact that it's overall well situated, is that the city's parkland, if we look at it in terms of active parkland, which is the industry standard is to consider that as community park and neighborhood park, then it's actually below average levels for the population when compared to neighboring communities. And there is a provincial average as well as a Canadian target that has been used in past. Again, both of those are to be taken with a grain of salt, but it is useful to recognize that in those 3 ways of looking at it, then Colwood does compare a little bit below average in those ways. And so something to consider as we move forward in terms of where we're targeting going.
Okay, before you move on, we actually have 2 councillors who have questions.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to allow Councillor Kobayashi and Councillor Parkinson to ask their questions, but then I'm going to ask the council to please refrain from asking any more questions until we get through the presentation. Unfortunately, I started with Councillor Day and I don't feel like I can stop. So Councillor Kobayashi and then Councillor Parkinson.
Oh, okay, I just wanted you just to quickly explain the difference, how you classify this. You have municipal, you have active, and you have community. Can you just differentiate those for me so I clearly
Sure. Yes, it's a fair question. It's hard to put up a chart and table without a lot of the background. There's of course a detailed other table that accompanies this that breaks down all the different things that are pulled into these summary categories. So municipal and other. Municipal is all of the parkland that is owned directly by the city of Colwood. Other is a collection of all the other lands that do contribute to the system within the city limits, but are not owned and held exclusively by the city. So the federal, the Royal Roads lands, the Fort Rod Hill, as well as the West Shore Parks and Recreation, Juan de Fuca Complex and combined site. All of those things collectively, it's all of the land regardless of jurisdiction within the city that provides some sort of park or parkland service. So that's the municipal plus other number. So you can see for Colwood, as well as most of the other communities that we looked at, that number is dramatically higher than the municipally held parkland, you know, by a factor of 5 to 10 in some cases. So we wanted to be sure when we were looking at that first municipal parkland metric that we understood what was being involved in that number. And so breaking it out and looking at the overall number is another consideration. Active parkland, that has to do with the park's classification. And although those are tailored to each community, there's a couple of classifications that are commonly held for most communities and for all of the communities that we looked at. And so that is a combination of community park as well as neighborhood park. Community park is typically a slightly larger park area and it serves a community-wide function. So Colwood Creek Park is a good example for the city. There's people that come from all over the city to that park, as opposed to a neighborhood park, which is primarily to service the people within a 5 to 10 minute walk, and provides a service that is provided in many of the other neighborhoods. So someone from Triangle Mountain wouldn't necessarily drive to the small tot lot that's Coleman Park in Latoria. That would be something that would just be used by the direct adjacent users. That active parkland metric is used. It does not consider nature park area, which is very important, but it looks at kind of more so what I would say is developed parkland, so parkland that has amenities and features and is more active in its usage. And because currently Colwood system is very heavily defined by the nature areas, which are very important to many people, that active parkland metric is a little bit lower as a result of that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that helpful? Okay.
Yes, it is.
Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, I'm good now. Thank you.
Okay, I know there's lots of interesting things here, so it's partly my fault for putting it up. The next one that I'll touch on briefly is the population-based parkland supply. So the last one was, and sorry, this is a follow-up on the same point, but it's just to illustrate that we do the same look, and then we also look at the projected populations for this city. And we know that Colwood is planned over the next 10 and 20 years to continue to grow, and at a rate that's greater than it has in the past. And so the summary finding there, without getting into the details of the number, is just that currently that hectares per thousand resident kind of look at things is pretty good. As the city continues to grow, then there will need to be additional parkland that comes along with it in order to support maintaining a ratio that's in that same kind of range or above the 5 hectares per 1,000 people. So it's nothing that's a surprise, and it's very much a part of the city's process in terms of memorandums on parkland and recreation space, et cetera, but it's just to highlight that point. So the second and related item under that category of analysis is the area-based parkland supply. And so this is, simply put, it looks at what the parkland area is of the overall in relation to the total land area of the city. And so the summary finding here is that Colwood has almost a quarter, 25% of the total area in the city as parkland. And so again, this is taking into consideration all lands that serve that kind of a function in the city, regardless of the ownership jurisdiction. So it's looking at the West Shore Parks and Recreation land, as well as the land of all the different city or municipal parklands in their various classes, as well as the federal and regional parklands, and as well as the school sites. And so when we look at that in an overall picture, it is, you know, about a quarter of the land area of the city, which is quite commanding. And so in that sense, there's kind of an ample overall quantity of parkland when we look at it in that big picture. And if we, because it's always curious to look at the targets, There is a provincial target, again, that is kind of used with a grain of salt, but it's about 12%. And that's looking at areas of all different densities in urbanity, et cetera. But we can see that the 24% or 25 is obviously quite a bit higher than that. And then in terms of parkland distribution, so the first one was looking at, how much parkland in terms of per resident and overall in the city, how much of our land is developed versus parked. And this one is looking at what's the distribution of those lands. So if we had 25% of all the lands in Colwood, but they were all in one location, and then there was kind of a complete desert or void in another, then this starts to tease out that the shortcoming of those prior couple of investigations. And mostly thanks to the overall combined amount of parkland, the city scores well when we look at it over in the big picture. So when we look at, again, all parklands, so not just the city owned, but everything that serves that purpose for the community, 75% of the population is within a 5-minute walk of a park or green space, and 97% is within about a 10-minute walk of a park or green space. So that does sound pretty good. The things that we then delve into a little bit more detail are what are the quality or sizes of those parks and green spaces, et cetera. So yes, there's access to something, whether it serves the kind of uses that those neighborhoods or residents need is a further that comes through in some of our next investigations. So the finer grain of analysis does look at things like neighborhood parks. So when we don't look at everything all together, but just neighborhood parks or distribution of community parks, then we do see a few gaps in terms of how those things are distributed in the city. So when we break it down beyond that overall level, we start to see some things that we can help use in combination with public feedback, et cetera, in order to start to form directions for how to move forward. And currently there are many areas where the common target of about a 5-minute or 10-minute walk to a community park are not met, or a neighborhood park. And so looking at ways to improve upon that. So the second part of the distribution analysis is specific to playgrounds. And in this area, currently the city is actually kind of below average in terms of supply for playgrounds. When we look at the facilities that are offered by the schools also, then the distribution gets to be much better, but we do acknowledge that those are only accessible during some times. So during school hours, they're not accessible to the public. And so the map is very difficult to read at this scale, but the key findings are kind of we look at both of those scales. So again, the overall picture of where those play amenities are, and then breaking it down also on the city side of things. And from a distribution analysis perspective, none of the neighborhoods in the city currently fully achieve that 5 to 10-minute walk radius for playgrounds. And the highlights in terms of the areas that are kind of at furthest distances or the least access in combination with community feedback that highlighted the same notes are Triangle Mountain, Latoria, Seaside, and Wishart North. So the draft recommendations and looks for phase 2 therefore look at playgrounds as a whole, and as well as specific neighborhood considerations for future playground development. And so the last component that I'll touch on for the quantitative analyses is specifically more so about recreation facilities. And so the first item here is outdoor facilities. And many of you are likely familiar, for both indoor and outdoor, a large part of the facilities needs are met by the West Shore Parks and Recreation Juan de Fuca complex. And they have a partnership directly with the School District 62 and several of the sites in Colwood to help aid in their programming. And so in this analysis, we are looking at those resources since Colwood is specifically a part of one of the key players in that collective that makes up West Shore Parks and Recreation. The gaps in looking at that for outdoor are pickleball courts, tennis courts, skateboard park, which is planned but pending, but has still come up until it's in place, a bike pump track, and an additional water spray park. So a combination of looking at what resources the city has and also doing a little check in kind of comparative communities. That one got a little bit more complicated because the comparison of communities, the side note is just that because we were taking into consideration resources that are part of West Shore Parks and Recreation, they service a broader population than Colwood, but we were looking at only the resources that were physically located in Colwood. And for that reason, we didn't directly compare to the neighboring communities that also make up the West Shore partnership, because a lot of their resources would be in fact the exact same ones. So we looked to other communities that had a population or a role that was somewhat similar, as looking at not the entire West Shore Parks and Recreation population, so largely a portion of the population or those groups that did not have their own facilities. So we were largely omitting the population of Langford in trying to establish the methodology so that there was some clear kind of limits in doing the comparison for this component. And then similarly for the indoor, it was looking, since Colwood doesn't independently own the indoor recreation facilities, but those needs are met by the partnership and involvement with West Shore Parks and Recreation, and specifically at the Juan de Fuca complex that's physically located within the city. We did a quick comparison there in terms of seeing how things looked and looking at the feedback that we received from the public. And it's currently not a gymnasium at that site, but that need is being met by bookings through the school that West Shore Parks and Recreation manages for the school district sites in off hours. And then the only other item that was identified is that a youth center type facility in the city of Colwood. And that correlates to some of the outdoor recreation components that also showed up, things like the skate park or bike pump track, etc., looking to kind of even out the facilities that are available to different demographics and interest groups in the city. So that was perhaps a lot of information rather quickly, but just gives you a sense, I suppose, of a highlights cross-section of some of the things from technical analysis, some of the things we heard from public feedback as being two of the key components, along with some of the other trends and research that we have done specific to Colwood in order to pull that together and create the draft plans that we're exploring in phase 2. And with the foundation formed from those different components, overarching to all of it is the vision and guiding principles, which define a framework for the current plan and for the changes and additions and continuation of it moving forward. And so in terms of what we heard, the Parks and Recreation are integral to the quality of life in Colwood. That was kind of a message that we heard loud and clear. And it was a very kind of similar resonance with public and stakeholder feedback that articulated that this is something of really strong importance for the community. And keywords that came up when we asked about this specifically in terms of vision, nature, green, access, accessibility. So Councillor Day, that might be of interest to you. That was very high on the list of what we heard, and very much related to that, connected and trails and play. Those were the top list items in terms of if we summarize it down and we ask people to use keywords to describe what they see for the system in the future. And for top values, connectivity, protecting the environment, community health and wellness, safety and accessibility, and having a legacy for future generations. So that's formed the foundation for the draft vision and guiding principles that we've developed, and we're checking back in with the community on phase 2 to see if we've got it right. So the vision statement, it describes a long-term future and builds on existing strengths and community values while simultaneously envisioning and being kind of aspirational in terms of what the system could become in the future. And the vision provides a reminder about the spirit and intent for the system in Colwood, and it's intended to help guide decisions about future changes and developments so that they make progress towards the community aim. And so the draft vision as it currently stands is: residents enjoy a city that is green by nature and the privilege of a well-connected network of parks and trails within easy walking distance of home. Colwood's parks, recreation, and natural systems are unique to this place and integral to the community's identity and exceptional quality of life. The world-class waterfront is iconic and balances resilience to climate change and sea level rise, respect for the environment, and is a vibrant destination for activity and cultural events in the region. The diverse amenities and thoughtful distribution of Colwood's parks and recreation empower all ages and abilities to live a healthy lifestyle and provide a legacy for generations to come. And then the follow-up to that overarching statement, which really tries to pull forward the key components that are the underpinnings of all the subsequent strategic actions and recommendations and project ideas, et cetera, are the guiding principles and their supporting objectives. And so they support realization of the vision, or they kind of break it down into its key components. And if a potential project meets the guiding principles and objectives, then it will very likely support the spirit and focus of the master plan. And so the 6 draft guiding principles for this plan are to celebrate our natural character, to strengthen our connectivity, encourage our community health and wellness, protect and respect our environment, nurture our partnerships, and enhance safety, accessibility, and inclusiveness. So that's a key kind of guiding point in terms of checking back with the community at that higher level, and then asking them about some of the specific directions that we've heard as a result of the public feedback that we've got to date, as well as the analysis and work that we've been doing to complement that. And so we're poised for engaging the community's feedback for phase 2, exploring options. And the key aims of this phase are really to reflect what we heard so that they can clearly see that linkage, as I've mentioned, and to check in, did we get it right? So did we, there's some people that maybe weren't able to participate or didn't participate in that first phase, or maybe some people shared initial thoughts but have different kind of furthering thoughts as they continue. And so really collectively, it's identifying gaps or refinements for, did we miss anything? And then to gauge community support for the draft directions and refinements for how things are directing as we go forward. So as in phase 1, outreach in phase 2 will be a balance across 3 main platforms. And there's a shift in emphasis for digital tools through the Let's Talk Colwood platform and social media, since there are less opportunities to be in person and share this information at community events or gatherings. And but parallel to that, we still recognize very clearly that digital outreach and tools are not accessible to all. And so there's a clear role and importance still for maintaining print tools and communications other than digital as a part of the approach that we're taking. And so lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it is that role of communications via people, via trusted networks and word of mouth. So our audience for this plan is comprehensive and diverse. And so we still need to connect with people in diverse ways. And so to begin, the first item for the digital outreach for phase 2. And the key components for that are updates to the project webpage. So there's many people already familiar with that, but it's cueing them into and letting them know that there's something current and new that's happening, as well as through the social media, or the digital platform that the city holds with Let's Talk Colwood. Complementing that with a social media campaign for those that are following and paying attention in those capacities. We've prepared a video short, which is to heighten online presence and interest, and in part kind of to backfill from some of our switched strategies in order to respond to COVID-19 conditions and recommendations. And then also looking to key items with media release, and e-notification distribution, which is more targeted, and the e-notification, social media is great for the broad community, and the e-notification is really good for all of those that we've engaged and spoken with through the process till now. We can reach out to them again, and the success, it feels a little bit more personalized, and so sometimes the success can be a little bit higher than the broader social media efforts. And then recognizing that everyone doesn't interact online, there's a pool of print tools to make sure that we're crossing the community. And the key component, first one there, is the fall newsletter that features an update on the process and a call to action for people to participate in phase 2 through October. And so that has gone out, will be shortly. And so that's a key component that will reach most kind of addresses in the community. And then our schedule and timing for phase 2 kind of related to that newsletter release as being a key opportunity for us to mail broadly and get into the community in a way that was something other than digital. Supplemental to the newsletter, there's a Posts in Parks series of signs that is an adaptation on what was done in the first phase. And so those are being deployed just in advance of the launch and will be changing throughout the 4-week period in order to try and catch people who care about parks in parks and to let them know that this process is happening and to call them to action to participate and share their feedback. And so they're fun signs that are designed to engage people's interests and address them right where they are. And then the last couple of items here are still necessary and important ones to fill pieces. So posters in the community at key locations such as grocery stores, targeted drop-offs. And so that is a handout to key locations in the community that might be harder to reach audiences such as seniors residences and affordable housing. And then there's a paper copy of the survey and materials available for those that can't or don't prefer to complete it online. And so the final, and as I said, maybe one of the more important parts of the outreach is people and word of mouth. And so although our project team is only a few, there are expansive networks within the city and within West Shore Parks and Recreation. And so reaching out and using those conduits as a means of letting people know that this is happening is highly successful in our first phase. And so we're looking to duplicate those efforts in this phase as well. Most often it is a friend or a neighbor or a direct connection that you trust that kind of inspires you to actually participate in looking at something. So I guess Mayor and Council and anyone listening, since you have substantial networks and followers, the ask for you is to use your voice and use your networks in order to encourage people that phase 2 is underway and that their participation is important. So the 2 primary points of engagement for phase 2 are the community-wide survey. And so it is the primary form of us collecting feedback. And it refers to maps and materials for the draft list of what we're calling the ideas list for what we're intending or what we're thinking is the direction for the draft plans and strategic actions. And so we're checking in with people to get a broader and higher sense of how those resonate with them. And the second one is complementary to that, and that's engaging directly with key stakeholder groups and organizations. So we've been in contact with West Shore Parks and Recreation and key contacts there, as well as the school district and others. And it's keeping those relationships and more detailed forms of input from specific user groups as part of the information that we gather for this part of the process. And that also includes First Nation, the local First Nations, and some of the local interest groups in the city. So the system in Colwood is a collective, and directly involving those different stakeholders is key to our path forward. And so to close, as an overview of the next steps and key timeline for the process, firstly, there's the immediate step for phase 2 engagement, which will continue through October, and the key components to that being the community survey and promoting participation and input to that in whatever form people are able. And then we'll prepare a review of what we heard in phase 2, and a draft plan will be compiled with the intent to be able to come in draft form to council with that. And then we'll be, just because of timeline and sensitivity and wanting to come back out to the community when they're able to pay attention to it, we'll be waiting until after December winter holidays and after that first portion of January in order to refer the draft plan out to the public for the final round of community engagement and input on that. And then the culminating step will be to involve council again in the finalization of the plan in the early part of 2021. So that was long, but that's all I have for now. And I'm wondering if there's people that had hands up for any other questions as I went through things, or if there's anything I can help clarify.
Yeah, Councillor Councillor Baxter first.
Hi, what is a bike pump track and what is a paddling boat?
Yes, a bike pump track is it's a facility that's smaller in scale, but it's geared at skills that are related to mountain biking. And so, but it's not at the scale of a network of mountain biking trails. So there's features that are kind of ramps and banked areas that allow people to kind of go around and build on those specific kinds of skills. So it's related to the BMX facility that's at West Shore Parks and Recreation at the Juan de Fuca complex right now. But it's, yeah, so it's of all ages, but geared towards kind of trail skills and abilities on bikes, if that's helpful.
Yeah.
And sorry, what was the second one that you asked about?
The paddling boat.
Oh yes, sorry. It's not specifically just for those little boats you sit and move with your feet, but anything that is a non-motorized craft, so stand-up paddle boards or canoes or kayaks or windsurf boards, etc. So any vessel which you can kind of handle with your hands, but having a better spot or location dedicated to access to the water and launching for those kinds of boats. So mostly boats that are paddled in some capacity, although a couple of those are more wind powered.
Okay, thank you. And when you were describing active parkland, I thought of Havenwood Park, which is mostly a nature park. But a lot of people go there for exercise because
certainly.
A long run of steep stairs.
Yes.
And so they get their exercise going up and down the stairs. So does at least that part of it contribute to our active parkland inventory?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and this is one of the threads that kind of highlights each of those metrics having something that they consider, but also a lot of things that are generalized or some things that are lost in the translation. And so I would agree with you that there's many, especially with the current trends today, trails and the way that people use trails, especially features like stairs or incline, and the relationship to kind of active and healthy recreation can be a very strong one, even though in terms of the practice on the analysis side and how that metric is used amongst other communities, they look specifically at parks that are of a different character or style and function, and those nature park areas and trails aren't included within that bracket. There's certainly argument for why those things should be considered, and that's one of the reasons why we look at that number, but we don't take it we don't take it on its own, because there's lots of room to kind of poke holes in why or why not Colwood may be above or below a said kind of threshold in that capacity, and you need to look at the specifics of the community in order to really get into those details. And so that's a really good example of, here's one element that in the city's current system, it's heavily defined by, and much to the support of the community, the natural areas as being the defining point for parkland. And so when we look at it in the kind of fitted into boxes, it means that it doesn't score well in a couple of areas because of that. But whether that's an issue for the community, it seems that it is not, in what we heard from them in the community feedback. And that's why balancing those metrics and targets and benchmarks with specifics for the community is so important, and we simply cannot depend on one without the other.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification, and thank you for the presentation.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I thought that was an excellent presentation. That's great work by both Ms. Evans and Jill Collins, and so well done. And I recognized what you said about quantitative analysis not really being the way to go anymore, and people are moving away from it. Regrettably, I'm a quantitative kind of guy, so I'm going to go down there. And so just a couple of things that would probably be helpful in the next report. You talked about the sort of parkland area per 1,000 people, and showed how it declined as the population grew. But I think it would be more accurate to look at certainly some of the major population growth was going to be in areas that are going to be dedicating additional park. So certainly, it would be kind of useful to sort of go, well, if the population grows like this, and if you get park from Royal Bay and Olympic View and places, how are we doing? That would sort of give, I think, the council a little better guideline. And similarly at the rec center, some of those things, it'd be nice to sort of say, you got 3 softball diamonds in the community and 3 more at the rec center or something like that, just to sort of delineate which ones are at the rec center and which ones are throughout the community. But as I said, overall, I thought it was a great job. Well done.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson. Yes, I certainly appreciate your comment, and the one about the population versus parkland. You're exactly right in the sense that, the way that development is currently set up, there's absolutely no way that it's going to move forward without any addition to Parkland. So those numbers that we're saying, if we take the current area of the parkland for the city and we just apply additional population, then obviously there's a gap. And so it's just a tool for staff to have a little bit of numbers, I guess, in support of that parkland that's being pursued in those development applications and discussions, and allow them to check in on how those contributions are fitting in to the overall picture. So it certainly needs both components, and Colwood is poised in a way that it's not just pursuing population growth without additional parkland, but it just gives a little bit of information in order to compare and check in on how that's going. And then as far as the facilities, yeah, we are gathering a little bit more detail. The community survey number 2 checks in on the draft directions on a variety of items, but it also asks some additional questions specific to facilities, and the purpose and intent of that is exactly to try and inform or equip the city and in their role in conversations with West Shore Parks and Recreation as well, just in terms of any directions that we can give in order to give some specifics regarding the facility side of things. Currently, the city itself for facilities only has a couple, and the rest are held with the joint partnership with West Shore and with the school district. I think there's one basketball court and a couple of other items, but all the rest of the items you saw on those lists are part of the West Shore resources.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day?
Thank you. I know I asked a couple questions earlier, but I was trying to be brief, but I'm just wondering, I know that you've said that the data that you've received thus far has shown a large percentage of the population appreciating the natural parks and the number of them that we have. What I'm just wondering is, because of the continued pressure, with increasing population, one of the issues that we've tried to head off at the past before has been, loving our parks too much. Sometimes we wear them out a bit. So I'm just wondering if we have any benchmarks that is going to come with this master plan for the health of the environment in those parks, to kind of trigger us if they're needing some attention or different engagement to make people aware of issues as they come up, because they are quite precious and because people love them. And not only that, but with COVID, I think I've heard from almost every other jurisdiction in conversations about just the huge numbers of people coming out and using the parks. So is that going to be part of the plan when you're done?
Yes, certainly the role of environment and parks and recreation, and especially within the context and community for Colwood, they're inseparable. In terms of helping to direct that, I think there are areas within the existing park system that are natural in character, but are, they receive fairly good usage. Havenwood Park as a good example. There are other areas that were dedicated as parkland that are more preservation and protection as their primary mandate, to the extent that they don't have any trails or really any sort of access. They're smaller parcels, things like Carger Park Carger, pardon me if I mispronounced it, in Triangle Mountain area, or there's a small section, Claudette Park, which is often adjacent to Lookout Lake Park, which provides a kind of wetland function. And so it's a combination of environmental areas, and in the recommendations that we're pursuing, and when we're looking at where people are talking about the things that they like and where they want to see improvements, we're also going back to that vision and guiding principles, and understanding that there's a balance point there where people have access to nature and natural areas, and they really value that. We need to keep it in balance, where we don't introduce a huge amount of additional population without other similar resources for recreation. And then there's always going to be areas that are, be it parkland or not, that their primary focus is actually preservation or protection as opposed to a recreational asset. And I think it's in those ways that the plan helps to identify and manage what areas are appropriate for what kinds of usage, and then to put limits on the extent of usage there. So there's a lot of amenity ideas that came forward from the community for things that they would like to see, but we look at the parklands that are available, and there are many of them in the city that are not appropriate for those kind of amenities because of the preservation and protection kind of components to them. But then there are other areas which are more appropriate. So areas that have already been cleared or don't have the same kind of ecological values.
I have Mr. Borhill.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add to Kate's response, part of the master planning process was to start a process of creating a framework or structure for the individual parks plans.
Mm-hmm.
And the sensitivity to an area to overuse would be part of that assessment, and we would look to building that into that framework.
Thanks, Ian.
Great. Any other questions, Councillor Day?
I'm good, thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. So may I have a motion to receive the report, please? That is moved by Councillor Kobayashi. Looking for a seconder. Seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. Moving on to 7.8. This is Jen Hempting, Manager of Finance, Permissive Tax Exemption Update and Draft Bylaw. Ms. Hempting, did you want to comment on this before I look for a recommendation?
I am happy to provide a brief background on the report, or you can jump right to the recommendation and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, then I will look to council. Council, do you guys have any questions for staff before I look for a recommendation? Seeing none, we do have a recommendation that is before us. Do I have a mover? Okay, it moved by Councillor Day, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Is there any discussion? I will look to Councillor Logan, then Jansen, then Baxter, then Parkinson.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Jen. So I just want to confirm specifically regarding 330 Goldstream Avenue, so GBHS. So if I read this correctly, they're asking to have a tax exemption, meaning they would pay zero. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Then I have a hard time supporting that one in particular, in that we have provided a generous grant already, but also we have to realize that there still is a cost to service those buildings via police and fire, et cetera, and that comes with a cost. And notwithstanding it's an affordable housing project, I think we do owe it to the taxpayer that they need to shoulder a little bit of that cost. And when you spread it out, I think 10,000 over 85 units or whatever the amount is, it's a pretty small amount monthly. So I would not be in favor of including them in the bylaw. And I would be happy to make a motion to remove them.
Okay. So I guess that would be an amendment. So I'm gonna hold on 2 seconds. I'm gonna just record everybody's so that I get the right order for speaking on the main motion. Okay, I'm gonna clear people's hands. So Councillor Logan has made a amendment to exclude 330 Goldstream Avenue. Do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Jensen has seconded that. I'm going to clear everybody's hands. So this is a new discussion. I have a list to go back to the main motion, which I will. But on the amendment, which is just in regards to removing 330 Goldstream, is there discussion? Councillor Baxter, Kobayashi, then Jensen.
Yeah, I just want to say I completely agree with Gordy on this, so I'll be voting for it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. What's the precedence for these affordable housing things? What's the precedence for the city?
Yeah, so I don't mind commenting first, but I will look to staff as well. I asked that initial question. It is my understanding we do not do a full tax exemption or permissive tax exemption for any other affordable housing complex within Colwood. I did ask if there was something outside of Colwood. So like if there's another jurisdiction that has that. Staff were not aware of it, but that doesn't mean that staff know for 100% sure. So I certainly don't want to be communicating that. But as far as I know, Councillor Kobayashi, this would be the first.
Okay, thank you very much.
And staff, please correct me if I'm incorrect.
I'll jump in just very briefly. On the 2020 assessment roll, we do have 8 affordable housing properties. And to confirm what Mayor Martin just said, the city currently does not offer any permissive tax exemption to any of the other affordable housing properties located in Colwood. And with respect to 330 Goldstream in particular, the city did make a $220,000 contribution from our affordable housing fund.
Councillor Kobayashi, do you have anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you. That answers my question.
Great, thank you. Councillor Baxter's next.
I thought I'd already spoken to this.
Oh, did you? My apologies. I'm just going through the list here. Councillor Jensen, do you wish to speak to this?
Thank you. I am supportive of the amendment and similar comments from my peers. Concern is that there is all sorts of buildings like this in our community when we know that we're at what, roughly 4% of total housing, and we're well beyond other jurisdictions. So this just feels like the thin edge of the wedge. And you know, let alone the fact that their 70% of their the value of their property is forgiven by BC Assessment, so they're already paying a small amount compared to the rest. And as I understand it now, more about these revenues or taxes that if they're not paying their bit, that gets redistributed to the rest of the community. So we'd be doing a disservice.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. People had hands up, but then they took them down. So I'm just going to give a moment. If anybody intended to have their hand up to speak to the amendment, I'll wait a moment. Not seeing any. So I will call the question on the amendment, which is to remove 330 Goldstream. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. So 330 Goldstream now comes off the list. I'm coming back to the main speakers list. Councillor Jensen, you were up next. You wish to speak again? No, thank you. Councillor Baxter, do you wish to speak to the main motion?
Yeah, I just have a question. The second part of that motion, that council repeal the bylaw, etc., is that just a housekeeping thing to get rid of a redundant bylaw?
Steph?
Yes, that bylaw simply speaks to fiscal years 2011 through to 2020. So it's simply a housekeeping to repeal that bylaw. It is no longer active.
Thank you. And second question, if we pass this motion, would it be a 10-year exemption again?
Great question. So this recommendation that's before you is to consider an amendment to the existing 2020 through 2023 bylaw, which would mean that these organizations would receive a 3-year exemption. They'd be coming into a 4-year term that is already 1 year in. Council does have the option to create a new bylaw for these organizations if they wish to have a different term.
No, thank you for the explanation, and I'm good with a 4-year term.
Great. Mr. Parkinson, then Kobayashi on the main motion.
Your worship, I think we better clean up the main motion. Right
Okay.
now, it reads that council consider whether or not to direct staff to bring forward an amendment. Obviously, we got both in there. We should say that council direct staff to bring forward an amendment.
Thank you.
Think of whether or not.
Yeah, so we'll strike the words whether or not. So
Yeah, I
that
think
council, and two, so whether or not to will be struck, so that it will read that council directs staff to bring forward an amendment to the 2020-2023.
Perfect.
Great, thank you. Thank you, thanks for catching that. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Basically, our term is over 2022. So why do we extend this to 2023? Do we want to, put this onto the next council, or should we just end this in 2022? And they could do it for a 4-year cycle. So just a question I have.
I guess probably staff don't want to comment on it since this is up to council to make that decision. I think that's a good argument, Councillor Kobayashi. I think I would have a tendency to still be encouraged to go to 2023, just in that a new council is going to have to be learning a lot and making a lot of decisions within that first year, and to come back in year 2 and then to actually understand how the municipality is working and everything would be my thought process. But
that's fair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Day.
I was just going to add to that.
Sorry, Councillor Day. Just before you do, my apologies. I just saw that Ms. Hempting wanted to comment on it. Did you wish to comment something else? Jen?
Just offer a brief background. This term was discussed when council endorsed the updates to the permissive tax policy last year. So the intention is that the recipients will be up for renewal in September 2023, which would coincide with the first year of the next council's term. So that was the intention with the 4 years that was proposed to start for
Excellent.
fiscal 2020.
Councillor Day.
I just wanted to point out that with the removal of 330 from the bylaw, we are only in line with the community charter anyways.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm confused for a moment. What do you mean, Councillor Day?
Well, the community charter mandates that we're allowed to offer permissive tax exemptions to places of worship, and that's all that this bylaw is dealing with.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry. I now I understand what you're saying. Thank you. That clears it up. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. So we do have the new motion in place, which is that council direct staff with the removal of 330 Goldstream. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. The motion passes. Moving on to 7.9. This is our economic recovery program, COVID-19 economic recovery plan, action item 3.4, identification of shovel-ready projects. Is there staff who wish to comment on this before I look for a recommendation from staff? Or excuse me, from council?
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
Hi, Ian here. Our program coordinator, Rachel Buski, was going to speak to this item.
I'm actually here, Ian.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this evening about shovel-ready projects and capital infrastructure grants. I trust that you have had the opportunity to read the report to Council titled Economic Recovery Action Plan Item 3.4 on the identification of shovel-ready projects, and I would like to provide you with a summary of this report. The City has a list of planned future infrastructure projects, and City staff are currently working on the 3 most shovel-ready projects to prepare them for grant funding applications. These are the Galloping Goose Overpass Bridge, which is intended for pedestrians, cyclists, and other wheeled users, including wheelchairs, rollerblades, and scooters. The Metchosin Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvements Project, and the Painter Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvements Project. Currently, there is one capital infrastructure grant funding opportunity, which could provide the city with 73% of the funds necessary to construct the Galloping Goose Overpass Bridge. On 25th of June 2020, the Canadian and British Columbian governments committed up to 100 million towards the second intake of the Community Culture and Recreation Programme to support cost sharing of infrastructure projects in communities across the province. This intake is designed to target projects starting in 2021 or 2022. This grant provides 40% of funding from the federal government and 33% of funding from the provincial government. Under this grant, the city would be responsible for 27% of the cost of construction, which is likely to be in the order of around $800,000. City staff are currently preparing an application to phase 2 of this grant funding opportunity. If council decides to support an application for funding under this programme, the grant application must be submitted before close of business on the 1st of October 2020. City staff are on track to meet this deadline submission date. Announcements made by the Premier during September 2020 identify that a second grant funding opportunity for capital infrastructure will be announced during the last quarter of this year. Informal discussion with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has provided the city with some general as yet unconfirmed information on this forthcoming grant. We're told that the total amount of available grant funding is likely to be in the order of 100 million. And this is intended to fund individual projects with a value of up to around 10 million. We are also told that projects awarded funding must be completed by December 2021, which limits projects to those which can be completed within 1 year of their start date. Depending on the requirements of this forthcoming grant opportunity, the city is preparing to submit grant funding applications for the 2 paving projects, the Metchison Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvements Project and the Painter Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvements Project. The city seeks council's recommendation to submit an application for grant funding to the second intake of the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Programme, Community Culture and Recreation for funds to construct the Galloping Goose Overpass Bridge. The city also asks that council authorises staff to prepare for and apply to forthcoming COVID-19 grant opportunities for the Metchison and Painter Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvements Project. Thank you so much for your time, Mayor and Council. This concludes my summary.
Your
lips
are
muted,
moving,
Mr.
Rob,
Mayor.
but we're not hearing anything.
Thank you, everybody. I was probably sounding really good there. I said the smartest things I could tonight. So I got 4 hands up right now, and I'm not sure if these are movers and seconders to the recommendation or if they actually have questions. So I am first of all looking for a mover and seconder in regards to the recommendation that is within our report. I see that Councillor Baxter and Day are the first 2 people with their hands up. Are you 2 supportive of moving the recommendation?
Move options 1 and 2, Your Worship.
Great. And sorry.
Yep.
Sorry, and Councillor Day, you second that?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. So I'm clearing the hands. Discussion in regards to options 1 and 2. Councillor Day, then Kobayashi.
Thank you. I think it's a really excellent opportunity for us to kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone, in that this is both a safety issue and an accessibility issue. This is a very accessible location for many in the core, but the road really interferes. I just watched a couple more senior cyclists dodging traffic the other day in that location. So being able to get a grant and move this forward in a positive way, I think would be very good for Colwood. It's disappointing that the CRD doesn't feel any obligation to assist with that, given that this is a regional trail, but either way, it's still a great opportunity for Colwood.
Great,
Thank you.
Excuse me, Your Worship, point of order.
Yes.
What are option 1 and 2?
So if you go to your paper copy, it is on page 131. And options 1 and 2, and I'll read this just so that people are listening.
I have, okay.
Online, I'll read it to them. So option 1 is to direct staff to submit an application for grant funding to round 2 of the BC Investment in Canada Special Program, Communities, Culture and Recreation. And 2, council authorize staff to prepare for and apply for forthcoming provincial COVID-19 grant opportunities to fund the following capital projects for implementation in 2021: the Galloping Goose Overpass, the Metchosin Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvement Project, and the Painter Road Active Transportation and Safety Improvement Project.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Coming back to Councillor Kobayashi is next.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is directed to staff. I just wanted to know, when was the Galloping Goose Overpass actually budgeted to happen? And what monies are being used to pay, would be paid or planned to be used to pay for our 28%?
Councillor Kobayashi, I understand that 550,000 is currently allocated for this project, and that additional funding will be requested in the next budgetary process.
And I'm going to let Mr. Earl comment as well.
Thank you, Your Worship. The 550,000 is budgeted for each of the Metchosin Road and the Painter projects.
Yes.
That said, those projects during the upcoming budget process, now that we are nearing completion of the design, we have new numbers that will be attached to those, and those are in the report themselves. The Galloping Goose project was not in the municipality's financial plan, and so should this proposal receive council support and should we be successful, administration will bring forward a recommendation as part of the next budget process to fund this from one of our existing reserves or one of our deferred grant avenues and or current taxes.
Okay, thank you very much. That answers my first question. Second question I have, so shovel ready. Don't we have another shovel ready project that they started working on right now? And can we kill off 2 birds with 1 stone? And what I'm talking about is the roundabout at Latorre and VMP. Just my question.
Can I ask that Mr. Molnay answer this question, please? I'm not sure about that particular project.
I can certainly. Through the chair, to the question, the city has divested themselves of that project through the excess work agreement and the agreement with the developer to build the project. So it's the developer's project with partial funding through the excess work agreement that's been provided. If council would like us to pursue grant opportunities for that, I am not sure where they can be applied. However, that's because I haven't researched it. So I have no problem going on and providing a little research. And if we can fit it in, we certainly will.
I'm also looking at Mr. Earl, but I would, just before Mr. Earl comments, it was my understanding that the deadline was October 1st. So we're like 2 days away or 3 days away. So I'm not sure how much staff work could do on that specific one. Mr. Earl?
Thank you, Worship. With respect to the specifics of the Galloping Goose project, and administration's asked this evening to highlight that as the project in mind, we had pre-design done on this project years ago, and while it wasn't in the current financial plan, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Community Culture and Recreation grant opportunity would not allow us to apply for the Latorre roundabout. It would specifically allow us for a recreation and culture project such as this Galloping Goose Overpass.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Earl. That clarifies that. I'm just concerned about, it's almost $1 million bucks based on a Class D estimate. So for the overhead headway there. So I am concerned about that, and it's not budgeted. And I'm very concerned about it. We're not generating any revenues to offset it. So I am concerned. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I just want to say the tension truss option for the bridge would really give a modern look to our town center, and I really hope we get to build that one.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. A few things to say. I'm very much in support of this. I think it's great. Let's see what we can do in the way of getting grants. Obviously, we don't get a grant. I don't think we're going too far down the road on the bridge over Shuk Road just yet. I'm a little disappointed that the CRD is not coming to the plate on this one, in that the CRD is the owner of the Galloping Goose Trail and the right of way, to my understanding. Certainly, they should at least pick up the O&M if we go to bat to build the bridge. But that's a discussion that can happen another time. I'm not too fussed about that for today. Other things that I would like council to have an opportunity to discuss in the near future, again, doesn't need to delay the applications for grants. I think if we're going to look at the sidewalks on Metchosin Road, we have to take this opportunity to look at the left turn from Metchosin onto Hatley. We've had a number of residents sort of suggest that would be a worthwhile thing to do. I'd like to have someone look at that. I'm not sure about the timing or the mechanism, but I think that's important before we go ahead.
Councillor Parkinson, I guess I don't want to go through a litany of, I don't want to go through a list of projects that council has desires to achieve. I would like to stay on to the subject of what would qualify under this grant. Because that's kind of what we're talking about too. This recommendation is talking about the projects that we as a council desire to apply by October 1st to the Canada Infrastructure Program for Community, Culture and Recreation. I'm not saying your question is not worthy, that we should be talking about projects that we want. I just don't know if it's the most appropriate place. So just keep that in mind. I'll let you continue, but just keep that in mind.
Probably the council table is always the most appropriate place there, Your Worship. And again, I'm just trying to put those out there so that they don't get lost in the mix and we don't find out that we're charging down a road and having to backtrack. So I do think that we should look at that. We're going to look at the whole cross section from Metchosin Road coming up, and that'll give us a chance to do that and perhaps look at 3-laning it. I think we also need to look at perhaps some traffic calming on Hatley. I'd like to do that. And then my final comment here, which is somewhat related to grant applications. At UBCM last week, they brought up the term shovel worthy as opposed to shovel ready, that everybody's rushing to get projects in that are ready to go as opposed to the ones that really should be built. So I'd like to see us also have a list of shovel worthy projects generated so that we can go down that path if and when it comes up. And I apologize for the distraction, Your Worship, but I had to get it off my chest.
It's not an issue at all, Councillor Parkinson. Moving on to Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. Just very quickly, I just want to make sure we have enough funds allocated for the Galloping Goose Bridge crossing to make sure that we can maximize the grant. I think we really need to be picky in its design. Because it will be one of the first things that you see as you enter the city. And so I think it's worthy of some additional investment and not some crappy highway overpass that we see going over the Patby Highway and stuff like that. We should be looking for more detail and be specific in terms of its potential for beauty. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Councillor Jensen.
Thank you. A couple of small thoughts. I'll be brief. First, as the CRD appointed member from our community, I mean, can you raise this at CRD? Are they making a similar application? Can they coincide an application to also get some work done on the bridge and
Yeah.
streetscaping and landscaping surrounding it?
This was definitely lead with staff and not on the political level. I certainly did not have any conversations. I'm learning it at the same time that you're learning at it. If we were to move forward and we were to somehow get a grant for the overpass, I would be strongly advocating that CRD participate with us.
Perfect, thank you. And I did notice in here, this is the second round of applications. Can I ask what we did for the first round, or do I just not recollect what we did last time?
I do not recollect either, so it's a good question. Staff?
Can Mr. Molnar answer this question, because I wasn't at council at the time of that phase of the grant? Thank you.
Through the chair, I too wasn't involved in any of the grant applications. Perhaps it was part of the economic process. I can't answer. Sorry, I have no information.
I'm going to suggest we didn't apply for anything in round one. That's what I'm going to say. And
That's good. We didn't have any shovel-worthy projects, Your Worship.
I don't know, like the stairs.
I believe it's in the report that we did.
That we did apply, Councillor Day?
Sorry. Yes, I believe we did, but they were oversubscribed.
Okay, so there's your answer, Councillor Jansen. It's in the report. Councillor Day.
Thank you. I just wanted to motivate very quickly that this was a major issue for Colwood. We have had bylaw officers down there handing out tickets to people crossing the road. We've considered putting up barriers. And it is an area where we have developed a lot of infrastructure on Whale Road with the hotel and the seniors building there. It could be a really wonderful addition to the area to make Colwood not only a statement, but very functional on both sides of the road for retail investments in the future. So I just throw that out there. This is something that probably this council hasn't looked at or considered, but previous councils looked at, considered, and ran into more obstacles than we could overcome to accomplish it. So I think good on staff to have looked through our past projects and come up with something that was shovel worthy.
Great, thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Councillor Kobayashi opposes. So I'll clear that. So that motion passes. Moving on to bylaws. Bylaw number 8.1. This is bylaw number 1700-03, official community plan amendment, Latoria South sub area plan, third reading as amended and adoption. I am looking for a mover and seconder for third reading. That third reading of bylaw number 1700-03 cited as City of Colwood official community plan amendment, bylaw number 1700-03 2020 Latoria South sub area plan be rescinded. May I have that motion, please? So moved by Councillor Logan, second by Councillor Jansen. I'll clear that. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hand. No one opposes. Moving on, I need a recommendation that bylaw number 1700-03 cited as City of Colwood official community plan amendment, bylaw number 1700-03 2020 Latoria South area sub area plan be given third reading as amended. Moved by Councillor Day, seconded by Councillor Jansen. I'll clear the hands.
Sorry, that's my hand. I'm not making that motion, Mr. Mayor. That was, I was in opposition to it being rescinded.
Okay, well, I had, okay, then I'm gonna have to go back then because I had 4 hands up. And I don't know if 4 people were voting against to rescind that. Okay, so we're going back to that third reading of bylaw number 1700 be rescinded. Please raise your hands if you are voting to rescind the bylaw, excuse me, vote if you are in opposition to rescinding the bylaw. Councillor Day opposes. Clear. Clear. All right. So now I need third reading as amended. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion. I'm just giving everybody a moment. Looks like there's no discussion. I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. I'm just waiting again. Councillor Day opposes. And then finally, that I need a recommendation that bylaw number 1700-03, cited as City of Colwood Official Community Plan Amendment bylaw number 1700-03-2020 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Jansen. Clear hands, just a moment. I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.2, bylaw number 1825, land use amendment, comprehensive development CD 28, Latoria South adoption. I need a mover and seconder, please. Moved by, Councillor Day, are you, your hands up? I probably didn't clear you. Were you? Yeah, okay, we're doing it again. I'm sorry, everybody, I got to clear people's hands. Okay, there we go. Councillor Jansen and Councillor Logan have moved and seconded it. I'm going to clear hands again. Discussion. I'm seeing no discussion, so I will call the question. Those in opposition. Councillor Day opposes. 8.3 has been pulled. 8.4, this is bylaw number 1839, land use amendment, RBCD5 zone amendment 255-265 Caspian Drive. Third reading and adoption. We have to do these individually. So looking for a motion for third reading, please. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition. Just waiting. Nobody opposes. I am looking for a motion to, excuse me, I need a motion for adoption, please. Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Parkinson. Discussion. Seeing none, those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. Moving on to 8.5, bylaw number 1844, main sewer LAS 3421 Sun Heights Drive, first, second, third reading. Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Logan. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition. Nobody opposes. 8.6, bylaw number 1846, West Sewer LAS 3421 Sun Heights Drive, first, second, third reading. This is Councillor Kobayashi, seconded by Councillor Jansen. Discussion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. Moving on to 8.7, bylaw number 1841, land use amendment, MUEC1 zone, Allendale Lot B, third reading. Moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Any discussion? Councillor Day.
Thank you. Just wonder if staff could confirm, I am still concerned that, oh, sorry, we're on Lot B. Never mind, my comments are for the next one.
Okay. I will call the question then. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. No one opposes. Moving on to 8.8, bylaw number 1842, land use amendment, MUEC2 zone, Allendale Lot C, third reading. Moved by Councillor Baxter. I need a seconder, please. Second by Councillor Kobayashi. I'm clearing hands. Discussion, Councillor Day.
Thank you. I am concerned with Lot C that the building may encroach upon an area of the lot that will be needed for a connection from Machosen Road to Allendale and Veterans Memorial Parkway. I don't know if staff can answer that.
Staff, is anyone available to answer Councillor Day's question?
Yeah, I don't mind, Mayor Martin. Through the chair, Councillor Day. So Lot C is one of the lands that's covered by covenant that we are restricted from planning, providing activity, and that covenant was reviewed several months ago with council. However, we are looking at the connectivity goals. In the future, we are maybe not putting pen to paper, but we're looking at that connectivity and working keenly with the developer. Because we've got different land uses assemblies, it'll be similar to a residential interface or some sort of residential force against the Machosen Road going to the industrial more land bases as you get towards Allendale. So there'll be what's called a transition zone, and we see no problem in connecting that via trail at minimum.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Day?
Sorry, no, I was looking for my unmute, but I was already unmuted. By saying that you're looking for a trail, does that mean it will not serve vehicles?
Well, as I started out, we are not prohibited, we are not allowed to be doing land use planning on this lot. And we do have a separative land use between the residential node of the OCP and the mixed use and industrial load that is considered for the mixed use employment centers. We do expect road connectivity to bridge those areas and form a transition zone, but I can't speak to a road network connecting through the two because there may be incompatible uses. As implied at the onset, we are not permitted to do planning of this area by the covenant agreed to by council in 1991. However, napkin sketches do show that we can get connectivity goals between some of the land uses once we get closer to that end. The transportation master plan does speak to it, and that is forever in our mind.
Okay, I remain concerned, but thank you.
Thank you. Any Councillor Parkinson?
Yeah, I got totally confused by all that. I believe Councillor Day was asking, is the road going to go from Allendale through to connect up to Wishart and Machosen? And we got a long story that seemed to be on something else. Presumably Allendale Road at current goes from Veterans Memorial all the way through to Wishart, doesn't it? And that's, we would expect it sometime would be constructed as a road. Am I missing something?
Through the chair, Councillor Day has asked this question by email. It is connecting Wishart Road, no, Machosen Road, as it bisects the green spaces, not Allendale Road from Wishart to Allendale. I can show you the plan on the transportation master plan, which identifies it, but it's essentially a north-south connection where Allendale runs east-west. It's different roads.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm seeing no other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.9, bylaw number 1847. This is the signed bylaw amendment, MUEC1 and MUEC2 zone, third reading. We have a mover and seconder. It is moved by Councillor Logan, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Councillor Day opposes. Looking for a motion to adjourn? Councillor Logan was sitting on that button, ready to, you're going to be king at Jeopardy someday. All right. All right. I'm going to clear hands. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody. Oh, councillor, somebody opposed. Councillor Jensen wants to stay.
There's always one.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night all.